Good evening, everyone in India, and hello to all our distinguished speakers and friends around the world. We are in the fifth session now of the World Universities Summit 2021, being hosted by OP Jindal Global University, India. And the theme of our session is Beyond the Hallowed Hallways, University Social Responsibility for Socioeconomic and Environmental Reforms. Well, that's quite a mouthful, frankly speaking. But before I would say anything about the concept of this particular sub-theme of the summit, let me introduce to you our distinguished speakers from literally around the world: UK, Brazil, United States. Our first speaker is Professor Richard Follett, Associate Vice President International from the University of Sussex, UK, and he is responsible for developing, coordinating, and driving the university's internationalization strategy and provides leadership to Sussex's international activities worldwide. With more than a decade of senior university leadership in the field of international education, Richard Follett is chair of University's UK International Africa Network and serves on the International Steering Committee of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, Higher Education and SDG Network, and on the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Education Committee in the UK. Welcome, Professor Follett. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Our second speaker, also from UK, is Professor Jonathan Grant, former Vice President, King's College London, United Kingdom. Dr. Grant's research interests are in health and research and development policy, research impact assessment, and social purpose of universities in the 21st century. Dr. Grant was formerly Vice President and Vice Principal Service at King's College London. He joined King's in 2014 to set up the Policy Institute at King's and was its director until 2017 when he stepped down to hold the pen on developing King's Strategic Vision 2029. Dr. Grant's new book, which we would highly recommend all of you to read, is The New Power University, The Social Purpose of Higher Education in the 21st Century, just published in March 2021. Thank you, Dr. Grant, for accepting our invitation. Welcome to the session. Our next speaker in the session from India is Ms. Moulika Arabhi, advisor at the Center for Environmental Law, WWF India. Ms. Arabhi is advisor at the Center for Environmental Law at WWF India in New Delhi, and also academic advisor for postgraduate diploma courses jointly conducted by WWF India and National Law University India. She has been also instrumental in launching an innovative Master of Laws program in Environmental Law, Energy and Climate Change in association with our university, OP Jindal Global University, and continues to play a key role in developing international partnerships in JGU and also WWF India. Welcome, Ms. Arabhi, and thank you for accepting our invitation. Our next speaker in the session is Dr. Lynn Pasquerella from the United States. Dr. Lynn Prascarella is the president of the Association of American Universities and Colleges, and she was appointed president of the association in 2016 after serving as the 18th president of Mount Holyoke College. She has held positions as provost at the University of Hartford and vice provost for academic affairs and dean of the graduate school at the University of Rhode Island. A philosopher whose work has combined teaching and scholarship with local and global engagement, Dr. Pasquerella has written extensively on medical ethics, metaphysics, public policy, and the philosophy of law. Welcome, Dr. Pasquerella. Glad to see you online, though we were we don't have the privilege of meeting face to face right now. Finally, our speaker from Brazil, Professor Márcia Abrahão Mora, who is the rector from Universidade de Brasilia, Brazil, and she is the first woman to hold the position of president of the university now in her second term. That's really impressive, Dr. Marcia, and very inspiring. She holds bachelor's degree, master's, and PhD in geology, and that's her area of work. Dr. Marcia accumulates experiences as a prominent Brazilian researcher at the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development, and she has taken various positions in university administration over the years, being the Dean of Undergraduate Studies from 2008 to 2011, and also has taken a lead role in expanding international collaborations and coordination at University of Brasilia. Her primary area of interest and research, of course, is geology. Welcome, Dr. Marcia, and thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us for this panel discussion. Now, as all of you know, that this session, we are supposed to really deliberate on university social responsibility in this particular session. And now, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when our university campuses around the world have been shut down for over a year, some of the campuses are slowly seeking to open up in a blended mode, but we have been all trying our best to continue education in the middle of the pandemic, because otherwise we are going to really face serious challenges of trained professionals in the future. After all, universities are the incubators of future citizens of this world, not just future citizens, but also future professionals for this world. And we have such distinguished speakers and experienced academics and administrators around in this room with all of us to really deliberate on this aspect, who have been really engaged in various activities related to university social responsibility. Universities and academia have been often blamed to be a place like an ivory tower where people sit and do their research. Often they are not very connected with the society and the world around what's happening. But the COVID-19 pandemic has all the more taught us that we are in a world where, and we are in a time and place and a position in terms of human history. We can no longer do that. We can no longer sit quietly in our ivory towers. Engagement is of primary importance for our own existence, right? But it's not an easy task. How do universities negotiate this kind of engagement with the community, the local, the national, and the global, particularly in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals? It's not an easy task. We hope that from our distinguished panelists today, we are going to really be able to learn some wisdom in terms of how do we really engage with the community, and how, or whether it is a local, national, or global. So let me come to the first question, I'll call upon Professor Follett first to respond to this question, and then some of you can also follow suit. Please feel free to raise your hand and say that I would like to respond, okay? So my first question to you is, in your view, do university as a social institution have ethical and moral responsibility in terms of socioeconomic and environmental challenges in the context of the SDGs and the pandemic? This is, of course, probably not the most important question, but how do we really leverage the resources, the intellectual resources, and all the resources that universities have in order to really exercise this moral or ethical responsibility. Professor Follett, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, and welcome to all our guests, and our thanks to OP Jindal Global University for this very generous invitation to speak to you today. And I think universities have an absolutely critical role to play, not just in delivering the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, but in leveraging our communities. In fact, in many respects, as Peter Wells, who's the head of higher education at UNESCO, observed recently, well, perhaps never before has higher education been so intricately tied to the economic, social, and environmental fabric of the modern world. And in many respects, COVID has really accelerated many of the anxieties that had occurred prior to the pandemic. Climate justice, environmental sustainability, the struggle for diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism. And what we hear from our students and what we hear from the wider community is, what do they want post-pandemic? They want a greener, they want a more sustainable, they want a more racially and socially equitable world. They want to be more connected with the local and the global. And in many respects, I think COVID has fast-tracked a new form of what I call global literacy, a global literacy around gender equality, climate action, sustainability. Well, if those themes sound important to you, well, they are. They are all parts of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals set out, of course, by the United Nations. And at my university, the University of Sussex, we've held sustainability as a central part of our university identity. We've created not just our own internal university narrative, but our global engagement is also shaped around sustainability. And I'm delighted to say that along with colleagues in India and around the world, we're part of the Association of Commonwealth Universities Higher Education and Sustainability Network. But what does this mean in reality? What can we actually do to implement? We, of course, and universities across this Zoom call and listening in around the world, all have researchers working on sustainability challenges. That goes without saying. I think that is part and parcel of university work worldwide. But what is important, I think, is the way that we use the university and influence the university, so the university can become an impactful agent of change. So the university itself can become an agent of delivering the SDGs. But I think one of the big challenges we face going forward is that there are so many SDGs and there's so many sub-actions of the SDGs. What we need is an integrative approach to the SDGs that seeks the synergies, the interconnections between them, and helps deliver university partnerships that can deliver the SDG goals. And I think that's absolutely critical. Universities need to act in unison. We need to act as a network. But we need also to make sure that the SDG education is being embedded into our students' lives, into our actions on campuses. We need to retool our curricula so that our graduates are empowered to contribute to the SDG goals, whatever their subject specialism may be. We need to embed SDG awareness into the fabric of universities. But I think also, and this is important, we need to use the universities to deliver and help create and deliver impactful change in local communities. But we need our universities also to be bridges into our local communities, so that we are not, as you rightly said, Dr. Mousumi, ivory towers, that we're in point of fact real actors delivering on this SDG agenda.
Thank you, Professor Follett. I would like to, also hear response from Dr. Lynn Prascarella and also Dr. Marcia on this topic, because both of them expressed interest to me about speaking on this, drawing on what Professor Follett said just now. Could you please respond to it first, Dr. Pasquerella, and then Dr. Marcia?
Yes, of course. I couldn't agree more with Dr. Follett around the absolute necessity for colleges and universities to view this as an ethical and moral responsibility in addressing socioeconomic and environmental challenges at the local, national, and global levels. Collectively, we're enduring the greatest existential crisis of our time. And as has been noted, these intersecting threats from a global pandemic, systemic inequalities unveiled by a moment of racial reckoning, and climate changes are reshaping public institutions, and particularly public institutions of higher education at an unprecedented pace. Environmental sustainability doesn't hinge on a set of choices in response to a single dilemma. Rather, the change needed is multifaceted, as we know, and perhaps as never before. Sustainability depends on a unique blend of science, will, and morality. The modern university has been a global formation, and we have, across our countries and traditions, developed the combination of mindsets and skills necessary to address the most pressing issues of the day. But the political and social forces that are brought to bear at this moment in time have the potential to undermine the impact of knowledge creation and its use for the public good. As we know, despite incontrovertible evidence about global warming and environmental racism, advocating for a sustainable future and adopting policies and practices to preserve our natural and human environment for future generations is often viewed as a political issue, impeding the willingness of college and university leaders to speak out, fearing alienating donors, governing boards, or legislators, and violating the law in some cases. Colleges and universities have made significant progress in institutionalizing efforts to promote sustainability-focused research, incorporate education for sustainable development into the curriculum, and reduce their own carbon footprints. But the policy changes that are needed have to take place, as we've talked about, beyond the academy, and they require impacting social policy. But as Richard points out, there are significant barriers to this type of change, especially because we're living in an ostensibly post-truth era where the denial of authoritative knowledge and the disdain of experts, in which rational inquiry built on evidence has all but been abandoned, is prevailing. Evidence-based research is countered by corporate lobbyists and other special interest groups seeking to maintain the status quo. And so at the same time, as we have these efforts to manipulate public opinion, there is a loss of public trust in higher education, anti-intellectualism, anti-scientific rhetoric. So we have to go beyond the traditional roots of teaching and research, get outside of our own echo chambers and speak to those who are most skeptical of the lessons we're trying to impart. And this, as we've talked about, requires colleges and universities to serve as anchor institutions where we demonstrate that our success is inextricably linked to the psychological, social, health, educational, economic well-being of those in the communities in which we're located and those we seek to serve. If we don't do that, we don't stand a chance of making any progress toward these complex goals.
Thank you, Dr. Pasquerella. I think that's really, really thought-provoking what you just said right now, and the kind of lack of trust in expert opinion and the problems on the ground with regards to really making evidence-based policy and seeking to implement those. I would really like to now call upon Dr. Marcia to share her thoughts from a Brazilian perspective. We have heard from UK, we have heard from US, so from a Brazilian perspective, if you can share your thoughts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. And it's interesting because we are in different countries in different regions, and we think very similarly. Here in Brazil, I'll talk about from the point of view of the public universities. The public universities in Brazil are free. The students don't pay. And we have different kinds of students from different social and economic parts of the society. And it's a challenge to us because we have indigenous people, we have people that are rich, poor, and in the pandemic, it became the differences were we could see more the difference in the pandemic. So they were there, but in the pandemic, it was, for example, many students didn't have computer, didn't have internet. And so our social responsibility here in Brazil for the universities, for the public universities, much more from the, for example, in other countries, because we have the responsibility to give formation for students that, for example, some of them are the first ones in their families to go to higher education. And also we have the responsibility to do the research in Brazil. And in the pandemic, our universities were responsible for the main political research and vaccines and all kinds of research. So we do have to have the social and economic and environmental responsibilities, and we are doing that in Brazil, inside the universities, and also with the public people. So I do agree with you, and we have many challenges to go forward in the next years, and I think we are prepared. But as we said, we have to work in networks. If we don't do that, we won't succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marcia. Let me now come to Dr. Jonathan Grant with the next question. Do you think the universities have done enough in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic? Dr. Marcia just highlighted the challenges from her part of the world, and we've also heard from Dr. Follett and Dr. Pasquerella. Do you think the universities have done enough in terms of garnering the resources?
Yeah, can I just reflect a bit on that conversation, because a couple of thoughts popped into my head, and I agree with the sentiments, but going through my head was a bit of history, I guess. And I remember doing some work a while back where I took the top 70 universities worldwide as ranked by Times Higher and went to look what their founding mission was. And core in the founding mission of these elite universities was social responsibility, more often than not. And the point I want to make is that I think recently, say in the last generation, we've lost sight of that social purpose of universities as we've instrumentalized it into research outputs and educational outputs. And what I would argue is actually what we need to do is to reconnect with that original purpose of the university, which had this social responsibility at its core, manifest in working with local communities, listening to those local communities, being shaped by those local communities, as well as shaping those local communities. And I think we've lost sight of that as part of our core social purpose in the language I use. And in one sense, to answer your question, in a very unfortunate way, COVID has allowed us to do that, because at least in the environment I operate in, the response of the university sector as very broadly defined to COVID is second to none. If you look at students, As soon as the systems locked down in the UK, two things happened. They moved to online learning, which isn't great, but they accepted it in a way that is deeply admirable of the students. But not only that, they started up all these community groups. I know quite well a young student who I've ended up mentoring started up a food bank in South London. And it was that generation of people who stepped into that space. And then on the research side, it's self-evident, but we've developed vaccines in a 12 to 17 month period. I've done biomedical research that says it takes 17 years to translate from bench to bedside. We did it in 17 months. Yeah, as a global community, that's extraordinary. And if it wasn't for universities, that would not have happened. So what I like to think is in this moment of deep inflection and deep crisis, actually universities have this unique opportunity to reconnect to that social purpose and rediscover their role in society and their responsibilities in society, which I think we've lost sight of over the last 20 years or so.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Let me come to Dr. Follett again. Dr. Follett, how do you think we can do this, frankly speaking? We have lost sight of the mission, as Dr. Grant rightly pointed out, but COVID has provided an opportunity. And what are the ways do you think, in general, we can foster greater collaboration amongst universities to drive the social responsibility agenda at a global scale?
Thank you for the question. I think it's very, very relevant, and I agree completely with Jonathan's point about universities having social responsibility, but having lost their way in a world of rankings and in a world of outputs that are educational research. But I do think there is a way to foster greater collaboration. But I'm a professor of history, and I'm always consciously aware, as a professor of history, about the way in which the past shapes the present and how the inequalities of our global higher education system become replicated in so many of our partnership networks. And that's certainly true from the UK universities. Often UK universities presenting themselves as the leaders in the knowledge space rather than the listeners in the knowledge space. And this isn't just uniquely true of the UK, but it is a problem in terms of global South, global North collaboration. But increasingly, I think what we need to do is ensure that our university partnerships configure to what we might call knowledge diplomacy, a new form of language, a new form of mutually reciprocal partnership models that are locally based, but also deliver fundamentally for the partners' goals, whichever they are. There are new types of relationships and new types of partnerships. I think all of us on the call would say, but that is what we should all be aspiring to. But as we look across the global map of international partnerships, often they are misaligned. They are not equal partnerships in the way that they're delivered. Sussex, my own university and my own space in this, is firmly committed to this kind of knowledge diplomacy, one that strengthens bilateralism, global engagement, interdependence, and multidimensional collaboration. And in many respects, like Jonathan's own work in his own scholarship as well, if we build upon the work of Jane Knight, Ariel Hernandez, knowledge diplomacy positions universities as key facilitators of consensual knowledge and global cooperation. And what we've already heard from Lynn and Marcia and Jonathan already this evening in India is the absolute common ground. The SDGs are not based on a national perspective. They are global, they're international. I refer to them as a new form of global literacy, a global literacy which is shared wherever we are in the world. And to deliver on that, I think we also need to deliver on a new kind of international partnership and much more respectful model of partnership. And it is a partnership model that I am passionately committed to, not just in my own university, but in my partnership work with colleagues everywhere in the globe. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Follett. And this really brings me, this conversation about partnership really brings me to ask my next question. It really connects very well for Ms. Moulika Arabhi, who has been really wonderfully uh, involved in this kind, building this kind of partnerships in her position at WWF India. And we know ourselves quite well about Ms. Arabhi's work. Ms. Arabhi, could you please enlighten us a little bit more about this building of partnerships, the kind of partnerships you have been engaged in building locally, nationally, and globally in terms of doing your work, connecting universities with the community?
Right. Thank you, Mousumi, and good evening to the co-panelists. One thing is pretty clear, like all my co-panelists already emphasized that universities play a very important role, and they're essential pillars in the society. Uh, there is a very strong sense of this the way we see it, like as an INGO, we see university as those partners who mainly work with students and employees and all the stakeholders whom they are attached with. The universities build in a sense of finding realistic solutions. They have this whole interpretation of very complex issues and situations, and that is mainly done in the manner because they create these responsible citizens also, who are supposed to act socially and environmentally, and they can take viable decisions. As far as the work of mainly when we deal with universities, uh, I would somehow second what Richard had said, but somewhere we feel that the sustainable development goals are very clearly laid out. They're very clearly defined in terms of what needs to be picked up by the universities, and the focus should be on the 5 P's, I would say, which is people, partnership, peace, planet, and prosperity. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because SDG gives you that blueprint. It gives you a blueprint of achieving sustainable future for all. The goals are big, yes, they are complex, but somewhere the document is there. It very clearly defines how you need to address and what needs to be addressed. So there are, mainly when we are dealing with larger problems like poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, also unsustainable, say, infrastructure development or human rights issues. The SDGs somewhere can give you that that basis from which the journey of the universities can begin. Also, SDGs, where most of the countries and also politically, we have a lot of pressure in terms of achieving these SDGs, and somewhere universities need to fulfill the role of the state also kind of meeting those SDG goals, and that contribution should come in a big way. Additionally, somewhere, when we partner with universities, what we look for is whether ranking, of course, is one segment, but in case if the universities are looking at certification or accreditation, when mainly with regard to the sustainable practices or how green their campus is, or whether they are adopting all the sustainable management systems into not just their building, but also whether the courses are very specially designed to fulfill those requirements and to teach the students in that angle. So that is that is something which we really, when we work with universities, we see that such kind of partnerships are developed. And further, universities, how we see it is mainly, we should be focusing, and the university should be focusing on private public academic partnership. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because everything cannot be achieved by a single agency. we are looking at a huge objectives. Everyone sets a aim pretty high. Now, how do you meet that? You obviously will achieve that only with partnerships and with each and every player coming together with agendas. Ultimately, it is for one planet living. We all need to move forward to achieve that target. And like, in fact, today in the inaugural session, the Honorable Vice President of India also emphasized that these partnerships are what will make the realistic and somewhere achieving the sustainable targets possible. So that should be the way forward in terms of partnerships.
Thank you, Ms. Arabhi, for sharing your thoughts. I would now like to go back to Dr. Marcia in Brazil once again, and to hear once again from her. She has already highlighted some of the challenges they have experienced in the middle of the COVID pandemic, particularly as a fully publicly funded institution, to meet the equity issues in terms of students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And you also mentioned, Dr. Marcia, that you are further planning ahead as the pandemic is unfolding in terms of the ways you're thinking you're going to support and reach out to these students. And based on what Ms. Arabhi just mentioned in terms of universities partnering with IGOs or civil society organizations to do outreach into the community, we would really like to hear your thoughts as a university leader from Brazil, what you think.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to talk about this a little bit, but talking about environmental responsibility. I think you are taking part of the news about Brazil. So the universities here in Brazil have important role in sustainability, also in the research with true data, and also inside our universities. So, for example, in my university, University of Brasilia, that is in the capital of Brazil, we are taking forward a lot of actions in sustainability. So I think we have to tell people by our actions also. And here in Brazil, the environmental change, for example, Dr. Pasquerella talked about the governmental role. So we here in Brazil have a problem now because the government doesn't take into consideration the science in many aspects, as in pandemic and environmental changes. So we have also this role. And because of that, it's also very important to have partnerships with universities all over the world to make a network to go forward. Because if not, all the humanity will suffer. And so the university here has also this role.
Thank you, Dr. Pasquerella. Dr. Marcia, sorry. I'd now like to invite Dr. Pasquerella to share her thoughts and insights from the US.
Well, we've talked about some of the challenges already. In the US, there's been a shift away from the notion of higher education as a public good to viewing it as a private commodity. Now, in the aftermath of COVID-19, where within the first 3 months after the pandemic, we had 53 million people filing for unemployment benefits, there's a pressure on colleges and universities to deliver an education that is regarded as immediately employable for the graduates, sacrificing some of the liberal education that we know is essential to educating for democracy and meeting these social responsibility mandates. So, there are overwhelming challenges. We too saw in this remarkable pivot to remote and online learning extraordinary collaboration among colleges and universities. At the same time, there was unveiled the expansiveness of the digital divide, the food and shelter insecurities experienced by so many students at all types of institutions. But now we have an opportunity to reimagine and reinvigorate higher education in significant ways. I think we have to focus on engaged pluralism. Universities need to use their convening power to play a role with respect to sustainability and climate change. They need to be important catalysts, bringing together actors from different contexts, contributing to finding solutions. And we need to take advantage of the collaborations that we built during the pandemic and continue to create teaching resources on sustainability and climate change, making them available to universities and colleges around the world. And these resources have to acknowledge a variety of evidence-based perspectives as a way of informing the public, and in particular, those controlling the purse strings at colleges and universities. We've talked already about the role of rankings. There are some efforts, the World University Rankings with Real Impact out of Korea is looking at social responsibility, taking into account different measures, metrics for ranking institutions. But we have to change the structures within our institutions themselves. Look at the way that we reward tenure and promotion. It shouldn't be based solely on peer-reviewed journal articles or on how many grants you get, but on the transformative power of higher education, the ways that we impact not only individuals, but families and communities through the work that we do. So that is going to take transforming the cultures within colleges and universities, and that's a shared responsibility that we have. So significant challenges, but also a moment of enormous opportunity for us.
Thank you, Dr. Pasquerella. Your thoughts, Dr. Follett, and then Dr. Grant?
I think I agree completely, particularly with Lynn's last observations. What we're requiring here is a systematic review of the way that universities work. Yes, SDGs and impact has become more insignificant. There's the THE impact ranking, which many universities on this call will have already submitted to, or the worry rankings that Lynn's referred to. But I think to really deliver on the SDG framework, to really position a values base, an ethics base back into the universities, we need to be reflecting not just on the ways that values shape and influence our institutional culture, but how we can actually live those cultural values. And it's interesting, we're here at OP Jindal's conference. About 3 weeks ago, we held the University of Sussex Global Partnership Conference, and the focus there was on the ways in which values, institutional values, can shape your international strategies, your engagement strategies. And it's not just about the out-facing of the institutions. Those values really need to be deeply embedded and deeply lived by our students, by our faculty, by our professional services, and by all our stakeholders.
Thank you, Dr. Follett. Dr. Grant?
Yeah, well, I'm glad Richard just made that point, because I was just about to make it in a slightly more forceful way. So he's tempered my my language a bit. So let me just sort of play a slightly provocative response. So as a sector, we're very, very good about talking about the SDGs, being aligned around the SDGs. But when you look at how we operate as institutions, I think there's some really big questions in that debate. And this is a very UK focused analysis, I have to stress at this stage. But we do not pay our lowest paid workers, i.e. cleaners, janitors, security staff, a living wage in the majority of the universities in the UK. That is a fact. Only 38 out of about 150 universities in the UK pay an accredited living wage. So when universities say that they are behind poverty reduction, I say, fine, let's that begin at home and stop lecturing everybody else. Secondly, that you can do simple things. So Again, a UK perspective. When I was VP Service at King's, we were buying our croissants, which we would serve at grand breakfast meetings, from an anonymous supply line. And we changed that and we started buying them from the local baker. And actually that employs somebody in our community. It didn't cost us anything more, but we thought about it and we did that. And then the biggest elephant in the room is actually around sustainability. So we all have these pledges around sustainability, but actually, and this goes to Lynn's point about academic incentives, you get promoted by jumping on a plane, coming to India and giving a talk. That's how you build your CV as an academic. We got to use this moment of Zoom, which none of us love, but actually it is sustaining the planet because we're not jumping on planes. And similarly, and more controversially, especially for Western universities, is the international students. So my university at King's, I suspect Richard's as well, is dependent on international students for keeping the university financially afloat. Okay, so we want to maximize the number of international students who come to our campuses, and every time we do that, we're damaging the planet because we're doing intercontinental air travel. Now, there are lots of benefits to international students, and I don't want to be overcritical, but if we're going to talk about sustainability, we've got to get our act in order as organizations, as well as build it into our missions around education and research. And I don't think we do that very well. So sorry, that's my provocation.
Thank you, Dr. Grant, for your response. And frankly speaking, this brings me to a question that has come up from actually one of our audience, which directly connects with what you just said right now, frankly speaking, because universities at the end of the day, they need financial resources, constant flow of financial resources for all the activities. But at the same time, we all know about the kind of financial challenges universities around the world have been facing with globalization of neoliberal policies. So in a context like this, how do you think universities can balance between financial imperatives and social responsibility? This is a question that has come from one of our audience. Who would like to respond to this question?
I'm happy to have a first stab. I see everybody else is nodding. So the issue of the issue of financial sustainabilities of universities is absolutely critical, but is so embedded in the jurisdiction of that university. It's very hard to make generalized comments because every country has broadly a different way of funding university. So I kind of tend to turn this issue on its head, and there's a bit of a cop-out to the question, and I apologize for that. But the question, if we were really a business, and I'm not saying we are, we have a product which is called higher education. We think it is brilliant. It could be a lot better. If we get that product right, then the market will value that product and we will resolve the financial issues. So we sometimes put the financial question ahead of what our mission is as a question. And I think if we spent more time having a debate about our mission, having a debate about that social purpose, then actually a number of these issues around the finances begin to address themselves. But I think it's very, very difficult for us on this call to come up with a generic solution, because in our 3 countries on this call, we're all going to have very different, 4 countries on this call, very different financial jurisdictions. And that makes it a really challenging issue to respond to in a policy way as much as anything.
Responses from any of the other panelists to this question? Yes.
I think the goals are not mutually exclusive. I'm sorry. So they're not mutually exclusive. And in the US, when we're working in situations where presidents have to convince legislators in red states and conservative states who are climate change deniers or trying to avoid conversations about sustainability because they believe it doesn't appeal to their base, it's incumbent upon the academic leaders to show how it really is in the best interest of the region to promote sustainability. This is something that Gordon Gee has done as president of West Virginia, University of West Virginia, where they were heavily reliant on coal mining. And he's shown how sustainable solutions to energy can actually promote the economy of the state. So learn to speak across differences and make a case at the local level. And we know that colleges and universities that engage in socially responsible investing often do better in their investment portfolios. So just helping people understand that it's not one or the other, that we can do both and achieve our shared objectives.
Thank you, Dr. Prascarella. I think Dr. Marcia wanted to also add something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's good to talk about the Brazilian experience. And here, yeah, I do agree that they're not exclusive. And universities are not business. So that's the point. We need money to finance our innovation and research and all our mission. And we have the social responsibility. And here, many people are not in the university and they don't have money to pay for university. So the government must finance the university. So that's a point. So we have to be aware of our responsibility, and at the same time, we must have money. So we need to equilibrate both things. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dr. Marcia. Let me now come to Ms. Moulika Arabhi from an international IGO perspective. You have already shared some of your thoughts in terms of public-private partnership and raising funds through philanthropy could be an alternative. Would you like to further address this point and say something else?
Sure. Mousumi, when it comes to university, especially when we engage with universities or say any donor agency or grant giving agent associates with universities, it's then we don't look at well how and what exactly how much of research has been already produced by the university. We mainly I can obviously speak for WWF, but then also other agencies. When we work in the project mode, there is always, in terms of what is that additional which is coming from the universities, more on ground solutions, like Marcia was just mentioning, that there is so much happening on the field. There are so many challenges which needs to be addressed, right from communities, being social justice or environmental justice. Now, unless and until you integrate you integrate these things, and the universities start looking at systematic solutions, mainly in terms of addressing the on-ground challenges. You can, for example, like I'll speak for myself. If I just take out a journal article, I read, I can appreciate the journal article for the author. I'll be appreciative of what an author is saying in that article. But when I'm trying to put that exactly into an on-ground situation, or on ground, if I'm facing, if there is an environmental challenge or something, if I try to put those things exactly on ground, maybe it won't match, right? So the reality might be little different from what your research or survey must have showed you. So somewhere we strongly feel that the universities should have these think tanks, mainly the policy think tanks, and someone who really understands governance very well, because ultimately it is that that is the bit which needs to be decoded for the community. You need to simplify the laws, you need to simplify the policies, you need to simplify these complex documents which are which are present there, including SDGs. These needs to be simplified, and I guess universities can play a very, very big role in that, of simplifying and creating that awareness amongst the students. And because universities have this strong force of youngsters, they can create a wave when it comes to, accepting or not accepting a, say, even a legislation, or say there are some reforms which are coming in academics. The students can be those change makers who really turn the way the universities are looking at. So and the universities, of course, be it public or private, should listen to those voices. There should be democracy when it comes to students voicing their concerns, or even faculty being bold enough to raise an issue. So that's where that's how we see the universities to be those change agents, and that's what is required.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Arabi. And actually, this connects with the next question I have in hand, which has also come from one of our audience in terms of, and this actually also connects with a lot of the work that you have been doing with the National Law University and our university also in terms of curriculum development. And this question really connects with this issue. Our panelists have all talked about the challenges of really implementing university social responsibility and the SDGs, even though it's there on paper, on the mission, on the policy documents. But when it comes to really putting it into practice and implementing it, there are all these gaps and hurdles. So this question is connected to that, and the audience is asking, will it be better if we really embed SDGs and university social responsibility as part of the curriculum, core curriculum of universities, to make it part of an ethos and value system, sort of a culture within the university, not just teaching individual courses on SDG, or just making it as part of the core curriculum of the university, sustainability and university social responsibility. Who's going to take the first shot at responding? Yes, Professor Follett.
I think it's a great question, and it really is fundamental to how we develop sustainability as a core educational competence. And one of the issues that every university tackles is, do we put SDG or sustainability as a separate strand that students can learn about, like an elective pathway or a major minor combination? But that works effectively for that group of students, right? But a much more effective way is about ensuring that the SDG agenda is imprinted through all of our curricula, and we're looking to do that at our university. But I wanted to flip it over to our, almost to the floor, really, because obviously India's got the NEP coming through, and one of the key issues of the NEP was around ensuring that curricula were more aligned, were also brought in liberal arts education. And over the last 15 years, we've seen universities like OP Jindal, we've seen Ashoka, we've seen Kriya, we've seen Flame, we've seen a lot of private institutions emerge in the Indian education space with a much wider educational vision than perhaps that was true of some of the old traditional major federal universities. And I have friends and colleagues and partners at both sides, both the new private and the older traditional. But I do wonder whether in implementing the NEP in India, there's a real opportunity as that liberal arts agenda comes through, the STEM and arts, the STEAM agenda that I know is being introduced in quite a number of the IITs in India, whether there's an opportunity there really to shape the curricula for the modern student with a clear eye to sustainability. Universities like OP Jindal are already in that space, but of course the Indian education system is so much wider and so much larger.
Thank you, Professor Follett. Anybody else is going to respond? Yes, Dr. Pasquerella.
certainly, there are institutions in the US that are focused on sustainability as a core component of the curriculum. I think of the Olin College of Engineering, but it's an independent institution. This is not going to happen in public institutions, particularly in conservative states. And so we need to make the case beyond the sustainability focus. And I think that can be done by looking at what is going to prepare our students to grapple with the unscripted problems of the future. And that is integrative education, so that they learn to think across the curriculum and apply their knowledge and skills in the context of real world problems, ensuring that there's a connection between curriculum to career. And it's that kind of education that was advanced by a commission I was on for the National Academies of Arts and Sciences, that in a report called Branches from the Same Tree, that showed that given the complex, nuanced problems that we'll be facing, of which COVID-19 was emblematic, are going to require that students look at the ethical, legal, and social implications of the use of technology and the ways in which rapidly changing technology means rapid obsolescence. And so we're doing a disservice to our students if we fail to include this kind of study in the curriculum itself.
Thank you, Dr. Pasquerella. Any thoughts from you, Dr. Marcia from Brazil, and
Yeah,
Grant after that?
I
Yes,
can
Dr.
complement.
Yes, please.
Here in Brazil, we have a national council that regulates the curriculum, but we also have flexibility. So in our university, since the beginning, we are a young university. We have 60 years. We will have 60 years next year. We have flexibility, and we have in our curriculum the possibility that students have human rights in their curriculum, SG goals, also projects. And we are really engaged in doing that for our students. But I agree that we have to go further. We have to have a national and international coordination to put that in the curriculum. And so if we do that, I think we'll have a better world.
Thank you, Dr. Marcia. Dr. Grant.
Yeah, so I'm very supportive of this conversation. Just sort of 2 points. One, when I speak to colleagues who are on the curriculum side in the UK, they always say curriculum reform is one of the hardest things to do. And I think it's partly because courses last 3-5 years. What you do today, you don't see the impact for a period of time. So, and I think that, you know, we've got to be realistic about that. And again, at least in the sort of US, UK context, universities are autonomous, and therefore they are the ones who create the curriculum. There isn't a regulatory framework around that. But the point I wanted to make was actually sort of remaking the point I made earlier about being shaped by the communities. And if we think of students as a community, and we look at this generation of students, Gen Zers, as the sociodemographers have labeled them, they have a unique set of values, a unique set of aspirations, which are so in tune with the SDGs and sustainability, that actually there's clearly sort of a demand, if you like, for a reform type of education that puts social responsibility at its core. And I think we as a sector, in what I would call our old power institutions, actually have a responsibility to engage with our students to co-create and co-produce curricula along the lines of what they want, rather than people of my generation telling them what they need as much as anything. So I think we've got to become much more humble in the way that we educate, and shape education around the desires, demands, aspirations of the students. That means we have to listen to them, and we're still not very good at that.
Thank you for your response. And this really connects with my follow-up question, and it has also come from one of the audience actually. And This is a question that I personally find very important in the context of what we are discussing today, in terms of what you just mentioned, Dr. Grant, that we are not really listening very well. We are not yet ready to listen to those voices of not just students. We just talked about curriculum and the teaching aspect with regards to social responsibility. Something we haven't talked about in this session yet is the research aspect. Something Miss Moulika Arabhi actually did try to hint upon a little while she was talking, that often the knowledge that is produced in the universities, it's in a language often not understood by the community outside. So the universities can play a key role in translating that knowledge for the community outside, right? And at the same time, there has been this increasing awareness, but particularly in the context of SDGs. I know there is a UNESCO chair position also on community-based participatory research and social responsibility in higher education. So even when we do our research at universities, are we really listening to the voices of the community, the problems that are out there in the community? And are we really ready to go out there to work with the community together to find solutions to those problems? And what are the challenges and what are the hurdles of those of us who inhabit the ivory tower kind of a place, sitting in libraries, to actually really go out there, listen to people and look for those problems and be ready to work with them hand in hand, trying to find solutions to those problems. Who would like to respond to this? What are the challenges and hurdles, and how do you think yourself, as a veteran, as an expert, this can be overcome? Actually, I would like all of you to respond one by one. First, I think Lynn raised her hand first. Lynn, then Dr. Grant, then Dr. Marcia, then Moulika, and Dr. Follett. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and it gets back to this notion of public trust in the academy. We need to engage in what Anna DeVere Smith talks about as listening between the lines, and take advantage of local epistemologies in our communities, because no matter how much evidence-based research we have, how much scholarship we can produce, it won't matter, it won't affect change if people don't trust what we're saying to them. I think of my own work in Kenya with research teams where we were working on clean water solutions, sustainable agriculture, and entrepreneurship in communities with a 33% HIV rate, who were dying not from AIDS, but AIDS-related illnesses as a result of lack of clean water. They wouldn't use the simple engineering solutions we came up with unless they could trust us. That's not just an international problem. I worked with a college in the US where students were working on erosion of beaches in their community and tried to get the community to engage in behavior change that would mitigate the beach erosion. And the residents were convinced that this was just a way to increase taxes or for the government to take their land away. And so without the capacity to speak to people outside of the academy, we are really going to be complicit in our own demise. We have to engage in community-based learning in a comprehensive way and view it as central to our mission if we're going to make progress.
Thank you. Quick responses. We'll have to wrap up this session. I'm just looking at the time also in another 2-3 minutes. Quick responses from around the room from all of you. Dr. Grant, Dr. Marcia, Dr. Follett, and our Ms. Arabhi.
So very quick response. So to a degree, we are doing this research, but it's not recognized or incentivized in the system. So I think that there's something about really thinking about that. And related to that is, I think if we could really support what people call citizen science, which is about working with communities and collecting data, analyzing data and interpreting data, then that's one way to address that issue. But it's got to be recognized in promotion issues, in tenure issues, and currently that's not the case.
Dr. Marcia?
Yeah, that's a challenge, but the pandemic helped in this way. So now all the time here in Brazil, people are wanting to hear about our researchers, professors. They are all the time in the TV. And now we have many fake news also, even from the government. So the scientists are being very important now. And I think we have to use that from now on to be near the population. That's what I wanted to say. And the university extension is also important in this way.
Thank you. Dr. Follett?
Yes, I think I'd just say, or add to what we've heard, higher education globally is under severe challenge. Its intrinsic values are questioned. And we've heard that from Lynn in terms of Republican politicians. We've heard that in terms of Marcia's observations in Brazil. That is all true, but I think universities need to be very clear and be better at articulating our intrinsic value of higher education, the intrinsic value of our liberal agenda as higher education institutions. We need to be much more proactive, particularly in the aftermath of COVID, in building back better and building back stronger, both together as universities, but also with our local communities. But it is in the hands of the universities and our university leaderships, and that's what we have on this call. It is in our hands to articulate the value clearly to every member of our communities and to our global communities too.
Thank you, Professor Follett. Yes, Ms. Arabhi.
So I would, coming from a non-academician, completely 100% background, I can say this, that, universities need to break the silos very clearly. It's not that the research is not available. It's not that the reports are not getting created. There is so much work happening in other organizations, be it INGOs or local NGOs. So which is why this whole local, national, and global level, there is a lot happening, and the research is also getting contributed with practical knowledge being inbuilt into it. So somewhere universities should also accept the community voices. It needs to be open to what is happening around them. And I guess that is when, because it's not that every time you think of a problem and suddenly you need to create some some knowledge around it. There's already something which is going on, and so I guess there is no point duplicating or reinventing something. So it's time for that partnership. It's time for that togetherness, wherein the collaborations need to happen, and these collaborations will in turn be quick, in showing results, or otherwise half the time will go in just recreating what has already been created by someone. So I guess this is a lot, it's very important that thinking out of the box and breaking silos by universities and by endless, countless experts, faculty members, that's what is needed. And somewhere the students need to write more, in terms of say publications, or in terms of that, is because that's when you will realize what is the generation next thinking about the problem you're asking them. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Arabhi. I think you have said it very nicely. We need to provide more opportunities, and something Dr. Grant has also highlighted, we need to be more open to listening. At universities, we are so good at speaking, and we are all thinkers. We are think tanks, and often we probably are lacking a little in listening, and also that encompasses not just the community around, but also our students. But the students are the primary stakeholders, and they are the future citizens of the world, and for whom we exist here at this universities. So probably, and in many ways, I think Dr. Marcia very nicely put it, probably COVID-19 a very it's a terrible global pandemic. So many lives have been lost, but in spite of it, it has really taught us big lessons in terms of, in such a short span of time, the kind of flexibility universities and different organizations and we ourselves as individuals have shown. We were pushed out of our comfort zone, literally, frankly speaking, to do things which we never imagined we'll be doing before the pandemic. So in a very rude way, the pandemic has also kind of shaken us up. And I would here like to recall a noted Indian author, Arundhati Roy, what she wrote in recently in an interview, for a particular magazine, and she, there is a lot of deaths happening around, and the pandemic is depressing. There's a lot of mental health illness issues around us with regards to this student population, with regards to even our faculty and staff and all kinds of people in the middle of the pandemic. But despite all these, mayhem around, if we would really look at the pandemic as a portal, look at it as a portal for change for the future, rather than thinking that it is all doom and gloom. If we would take a look at the pandemic as a portal for change for the future, because the normal what we knew as the normal world is not going to, we are never going to go back to the old normal. And we all know the old normal had lots of problems. So can we create a new normal beyond the pandemic together in partnership, coming out of our silos of departments within university and also the silos of different universities, different countries? Can we come together as a global community to look forward to a better new normal? So with that, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for this session. This was a really enlightening discussion. I personally learned a lot from speaking with all of you. I thank you once again on behalf of OP Jindal Global University for joining us from different time zones for this panel discussion. And we hope that someday beyond this pandemic, we'll get to meet face to face. Once again, and to our audience out there, we'll now take a 15 minutes break, as you all know. And after this 15 minutes break, the next session, the sixth session, is on virtualizing mobility, innovations for internationalization of higher education. We couldn't have had this kind of meeting that we are having today without virtualizing mobility, something the pandemic actually has, in a rude way, pushed us to think about. So 15 minutes break, and after that, we are going to meet again. And thank you to all our distinguished speakers. Thank you.